Quantrill.
All right. Welcome back to the Grenade Gallery podcast. We are back-to-back weeks. It's the first time we've had in a while. Me and Andrew are back being consistent. Like when I said we are back. So again, the hosts here are me, Emmett, and Andrew are here as always. And today we have a special episode from across the pond. Jack has joined us. How are you doing today, Jack?
Coming to you live from London. Guys, I'm excited. We're like a week out from the draft, and maybe it's a little bit harder to generate excitement for the 27th pick, but we've got like the whole minefield to get in today. So I'm excited to talk about it. And obviously you guys were on my pod and we had a blast then.
We got everything to get through. So I'll ask you first before we get into draft stuff. The season just wrapped up. How are you feeling? Are you like ready for the season to be over, get some break from watching a lot of basketball, or are you more like sad that it's done?
I can't lie. Like I don't want to sound like the goody two shoes sat at the front of the class, but I'm really excited because I think sometimes when you do content like us guys do, you're a little bit of a slave to the media cycle. Whereas now is the time where we can really sort of explore our favorite sort of uncovered players in the league, you know, guys that we think are going to break out next year. So yes, there's nothing sort of live to react to, but there's thousands of possessions to go back and watch. So I don't mind. I think that we've probably learned quite a bit from last season, especially sort of like the defensive dominance that we saw from teams in the latter stages of the playoffs. There are lessons to learn. Now it's almost like, right, I've processed all that information. What have I actually learned from it? How can we carry that forward into 24, 25?
Yeah, I definitely think it gives you some time to really reflect as opposed to basketball games every night, having to just go back to back. I think it'll be fun to really be able to sit back and maybe actually digest the season as a whole, especially as like someone like me and Andrew doing a lot of Timberwolves stuff to really like digest the season and how they played and kind of set back from the emotional side of it almost and really get into the basketball stuff. So I'll put that to you, Andrew. How are you feeling about the season being over now?
I mean, I'm fully into Lynx mode. So again, I always say it. I sit back row in the press, right next to Sneaker Reporter. Anytime Lynx security's pretty lax, come down and say hi. I can't drink while I'm working, but I can like cheers you with a water bottle or something. But so I'm in full Lynx mode. I'd say like as far as the season goes, you know, I was hoping that it would be a better Dallas-Boston series, but you know, you just don't always get what you hope for. In terms of like the league in general, I think this is going to be a really, for what I do with the Wolves, it's going to be really interesting to see what path they take. The league in general, I think it's going to be kind of a pretty tumultuous offseason. I mean, there's a lot of players that are rumored to be on the move and a lot of players that seem to be pretty unhappy. And I mean, we already saw Josh Giddey and Alex Caruso switch teams, and we haven't even gotten to the draft yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. That's a whole different like can of worms with that. We're going to jump right into it, Jack. I wanted to get your feel overall, just generally of the sense of the draft. Like, how are you feeling about it based off, you know, the media kind of pegging it as sort of a weaker class? You know, one person was like having the first pick is like getting Tobias Harris, which has struck me wrong in a lot of ways. But first, I just want to get what you think about all that.
Yeah, so look, I don't know if it's overblown. It's kind of hard as someone that's come to the game in the last couple of years. But I look at this class and I think that there are a ton of low floor prospects. And I think that that's more of the worry than, you know, not necessarily having the high upside ceiling there, because I'm sure that we'll get into specific names as we go. But there are a lot of guys that if you squint, you do see sort of all-star outcomes. And history tells us that there's at least sort of 2 to 3 all-stars in any given class. So I feel like it's almost, you know, teams put out, hey guys, this is a really bad draft. AKA, if we mess up with our pick, it's not our fault. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Whereas, you know, if you missed back in 2018, if you're the Sacramento Kings or to like a slightly lesser extent, you're the Phoenix Suns, it's real egg in your face. Whereas I think people will probably look back on 24 and they'll go, well, we had no idea what to think. You know, it doesn't matter that player X slipped to 8, 9, 10, sort of in that 2013 mode where Giannis slips to 15. But realistically, no one was ever going to pick Giannis back then up in the higher lottery, because if that pick doesn't work, then you look mental. You look like you should be sectioned, let alone be running an NBA team.
No, yeah, I think it's just people. It's like, I think the thing that has rubbed me most the wrong is just the indictment of players already before we have already seen anything. And like you mentioned, I think in every single draft class, there's been at least 2 all-stars in each class. And it's just, you can go back and like, we're not going to do it, but you can go back to each draft that was like considered weak, and you can pull out lots of good players. And I just think to like already post like names and tags on players before we've even done it just feels like lazy work as maybe media people. And I know a lot of times it comes from not actual journalists and not actual people who are in the spaces. But as a whole, I mean, with the free media we have, like people can post their things and everyone's kind of on the same level, like on Twitter or something. So we're all able to put out our things on the right like platform. But I think when you just take all these players and automatically pin them as Tobias Harris's of the league, it's just not fair to them. And I think you have to separate players from the draft, and how can scouts find a player that fits their team rather than looking at the draft as a whole.
Yeah,
I completely agree. What I would say is this draft to me, and Jack, it's funny you mentioned 2013, because that's kind of what I've been saying in all of my pods, is this to me seems like Anthony Bennett draft potential, where the first 8 picks are either busts or role players. But then there's a CJ McCollum, there's a Steven Adams, there's a Giannis, there's those better players later in the draft, where I think you're 100% right that it's about risk management for these GMs, where they probably really don't know who's going to break out. They might have an idea, but if all 30 of them say together, this is a really weak draft, and then the 15th pick is the best player, no one looks dumb. Unless like it's another Anthony Bennett thing where like Bill Simmons is losing his mind on the telecast, then that might be a tough look. But
Hey, right. I mean, but no one really knows. Like Bill Simmons, Bill Simmons did lose his mind, but he's also been wrong about so many things.
Mm-hmm.
If we go back to the 2009 draft with like Harden, Rubio, and all them, like people bagged on James Harden about how like, I just don't see how he can fit. Everyone was picking Rubio over him, and it's like no one really knows until these people play, and it almost goes to like football, American football, where it's like no one knows the best quarterback. No one actually knows. Everyone's just betting on a player until they work out, and then everyone takes the credit for that after. So I just think it's an exciting time, and as people who love basketball, and if you love basketball, it should be exciting. I think people just have this predisposition, and maybe it's just in basketball. I don't know if it's like this in soccer or anything, but to just hate. NBA fans love to hate, and they love to just automatically go to these points where it's like, do you even like basketball? Like, it makes me question if people really like the sport, because we just love as fans to hate on people.
Yeah, it's so much easier to disagree with someone than to sort of produce your own stuff. So Matt Powers, who does great NBA draft work, I think he's the head draft guy over at Swish Theory. Great website. Go and check him out. They produce really, really interesting stuff. He put out his 2024 big board the other day, sort of his final one, and I clicked on it and I sort of gasped, because his number 1 ranked player was Zach Edey. And, Zach Edey maybe is the most polarizing player in the class. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we can all watch the exact same thing and we can come away from it thinking very, very different things. I think a lot of people have said, I'm sure that we'll talk about Edey a little bit later, but
for sure,
he's not an NBA player. He's not going to be able to guard the pick and roll. He's only going to be limited to drop. He's only going to be able to play sort of 15 minutes a night at max. But someone that has got stuff right in the past before, someone whose I personally trust, sees something completely different. And the other thing that I like to think about the draft is everyone sort of acts like you're picking your found money guys right now. Everyone still acts like it's the 1984 draft, and you've been able to see Michael Jordan hit the national championship winning shot in 1982. Then he goes and plays another 2 years of college anyway. And it's like, yes, you knew exactly what those players were back then. You had it on tape. Now it really, I think the onus really comes down to, can the organization pick a guy, not just based on the talent that he has now, but can they help him develop into the player that, one, they need him to be, and sort of the best player that he can be?
For sure. I think one of the biggest examples that I could think of is Mattis Buzelis. Like in high school, he shot really well from the three, like an amazing 3-point shooter. He goes to the G League and he doesn't shoot well, and that automatically drops him down. And it's like, how do you even know? Like, you don't. Like, he played so well in high school, and granted, a lot of people play well in high school. That's just kind of how it works. And then you go to the G League, but you get one season from a player. And now, like, to your point, like, a lot of the players, I think, just play 1 year and you can't even decide how to grade them. And then people just want to push narratives onto it before just waiting and seeing. But that's like the whole paradox of drafting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, if I were to tell you guys that sorry to sort of hit a sore note, if the Dallas Minnesota series was a best of 9 as opposed to a best of 7, then we could very well have been looking at a different finals. The exact same thing for the Denver Minnesota series. I think so often we make really, really definitive conclusions from a really small sample size. Like, I've came up, part of my big basketball education has been listening to Thinking Basketball. And it used to really grate on me when he said, it's 82 games, it's a small sample. Because as someone that comes from watching the European game, like watching football, we have 38 games in the Premier League season, and it feels like an absolute slog. But really, I think that so much of this goes into the character, so much of it goes into the work ethic, and so much of it goes into the vision that teams have for their players. Like Matas, for example, I think he is an absolute sink or swim in terms of, if an organization gets him and just expects him to produce from day one, then there might be issues. But if they have a plan, if one of their sort of shot doctors has looked and gone, I understand why there was a drop-off in the G League Ignite, or they put him on the right strength and conditioning program, then these are the things that can really sort of alter the outcome of players' careers. So it should be fun to see what happens, one, on draft night, but really we can only sort of judge this in 10 years' time.
Right. The thing I always point to, well, recently I point to, because recency bias, but Jaden McDaniels coming out of high school was the #1 ranked forward and 7th overall in the country. He went 28th after playing 1 year at Washington. He's now an all defensive player. So it really is, if you're playing 35, 40 games in college and you have a 10-game slump, I mean, that can be your entire draft career. So I think there are some players that when they play 3 or 4 years, like Jaime Jaquez last year, we kind of knew what he was going to be. Chris Duarte, kind of know what he's going to be. But a lot of these one and done guys, you're almost drafting more of just what they did in high school and what type of character dude they are, which then you got to rely on what type of team you have. Because if you have a bunch of players that are going out every night and aren't doing as much work, kind of the Houston Rockets issue after Harden left and it was a very young team, things can spiral for those players. So I mean, I listen to Ryan Russillo a lot, and his kind of thing is always just no one knows. And that's kind of what it is this draft specifically, but there's very, very rare that you have sure things in the NBA.
Yeah, I think it's like, especially too, when you have a class that is very like anyone could go anywhere, right? Like, yes, we have some, Clignan or Richistar is going to go #1 if the pick stays there. Like, we know some of those things, but it's not like a Victor where it's like, okay, he's going #1. So then it makes people like hesitant and not draft players based on just best value. I think there's obviously players that are fit breakers. Like, they just can go anywhere and play anywhere. Victor Wembanyama on any team is going to absolutely be Victor. But these players are players you have to draft based on fit, which just makes the work a little bit harder, which makes it exciting, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we've seen so much sort of smoke and so much bluster over the last few days about the very top of the draft. I know that Alexandre Sarr hasn't worked out for the Atlanta Hawks yet. I know that there's rumors today of the Spurs looking to trade up. And whenever I hear stuff like that, I really think, yes, we know that they have French guys on the team, but let's make sure that this is backed up for the moment. So, we'll see when it comes to draft night. I think that a lot of these teams' big boards are going to look very, very different. Mm-hmm. And whoever gets picked #1, it's not necessarily even going to be about like that player absolutely deserves to go there.
Right.
Some of it might simply be a value proposition. Like I was listening to the Ringer NBA show the other day with Kevin O'Connor, and they were doing A-grade picks, and the Atlanta A-grade pick was picking whoever the Spurs want to pick so you can trade back to 4. So that is sort of this draft. When you don't see any sort of franchise changes, it becomes very sort of it's like the game is afoot. There's a lot of scheming to do. There's a lot of GMs getting on the phone. I feel like it's actually like that scene in Moneyball where we see the trades happen in real time. I think there's probably been a lot of chatter before this draft.
Yeah,
well, Jack, let me ask you, who is your number one guy? You mentioned a little shade at Zach Edey, so I'm just wondering who's Jack's guy?
Yeah. My number one guy is a foot shorter than Zach Edey. I'm a massive Reed Shepherd guy. Like, So the thing about this class is, if you look, I think that you can see sort of initiator outcomes for players like Rob Dillingham. If Isaiah Collier sorts out his shot, then he could potentially be a pick and roll player that achieves a very high level in the NBA. People are speaking about Stephon Castle as a potential initiator, as well as a really good defender at multiple spots. But if I'm not 100% confident that a guy is going to be an initiator, then I want the best, I would call them amplifier, that I can find in the draft. And when I watch Reed, I see all of the amplifier skills that I'd ever want. I believe that he shot 53% from 3 for the season for Kentucky, 52% from sort of the field. And then let me scroll down here. 83% from the line, but there was a stage where he's shooting 90%. He's also a steals guy, 2.5 steals per game, nearly a block per game, measured in with a 42-inch vertical. And one tweet that do you guys ever have a tweet where you think, this should have gone viral? This really should have been it.
Yeah.
When Reed went to the combine, he had a 42-inch vertical and he shot 50% from 3. So I did the Steph Curry with a 40-inch vertical tweet, and I was like, come on, this has got to pop off. And then I honestly think only Emmett liked it, and I was like, Emmett, you're a real one. I'm coming on the grenade gallery.
I will say, to go off of your amplifiers thing, and again, I will be full disclosure, I am not a college basketball guy. I am much more of a, let's see who the Wolves draft, let's see who looks interesting, and then I'll write something about, I'll dig in and watch 5 or 6 of their games and like write something up. But if there's one thing the NBA has kind of filtered out in recent years, is the players that don't have that one elite thing. I mean, Timberwolves example, look at Chris Dunn, and look at, Nolan Smith also, shout out old Duke player, but Chris Dunn and Wendell Moore Jr. I mean, great character guys, really hard workers for Providence and Duke, didn't have an elite shot, didn't have an elite dribble, weren't like elite defenders when they first came in. And that's kind of almost the worst case scenario now, because you just have a really nice guy that you can't do anything with.
Yeah. It's a massive issue. And I just want to say about Reed, shoots 50% from 3, but I also think that there is potential to be a playmaker. I think really the thing that gets me, as well as the shooting, is the lightning quick decision making. Sometimes we just think about sort of shot creation as, can you run a high pick and roll? Can you do it 30 times a game? Can you get to your step back 3? But the amount of times I saw Reed play for Kentucky this year and make the extra pass along the perimeter, sort of the hockey pass to a guy. And there were times where he'd receive a hockey pass, fake the shot, and then hockey pass back. I think that he absolutely amplified the likes of Rob Dillingham, who I'm also quite high on. And I think that when there can only ever be one sort of like number one initiator in the NBA, whether you think that's Luka Doncic or Nikola Jokic, that's up to you. But Anthony Edwards, for example, I think in an ideal world, Anthony Edwards would be a slightly better playmaker than he is now. But in reality, unless he makes those steps, your team is always going to have a slight playmaking deficiency in terms of in comparison with other championship contenders. So if I can slide some of that playmaking in next to Edwards with a guy that is low usage, or with a guy that can sort of take the reins when need be, I sometimes look at basketball as, can I hit all the relevant stat points as if you guys ever play Pokemon, like HP, attack, defense, special defense. If my number one guy doesn't have it, how can I make sure he's working in the best environment? And I think that Reed is a guy that can potentially be a star, but if not, he's going to make everyone around him look that much better.
No, yeah. I really like Reed too. I think just to give you pushback, just for the sake of pushback, the one thing that maybe slid Reed down on my board, which I could tell you who my number one is in a sec, but I think from watching a lot of Kentucky, because admittedly I am a big Rob Dillingham fan too, I think we talked about it a little bit, but what Reed lacked a little bit was isolation on defense reps. And I think that's not necessarily his fault, as in that's just how Kentucky played defense. But that's the only concern coming from, obviously everyone's going to say he's short. We all know that he's a shorter player, like that, whatever. That doesn't really matter. But I think his lack of isolation defense might be a concern when the NBA is such a isolation heavy, and then you put him as a smaller player. That's the only thing that I think dropped him a little bit lower for me, as I still really like the Kentucky guys. But I think I had him at like 3 or 4 I don't have it pulled up, but I had, just to segue to another guy who I really like, is Ron Holland. I had number 1, which is what we're talking about, how is everyone has a different player first, really. Like, I don't think I've seen one board that is exactly the same through the top 6. And I just think from Ron to be it's a little bit facetious to say, but he reminds me a little bit of Kawhi Leonard. And that's what I really like about his defense and his just explosiveness to the basket. And I think that's just what pushed him a little bit ahead of Reed for me.
Yeah. The thing with Reed is, especially on that isolation defense point, I think a lot of people have described him as, he's been able to achieve these wild steal numbers. And I think for the steals, he really doesn't gamble as much as you might think. But sometimes with the blocks, he is trying to make a little bit of a hero play. And I think sometimes when you know that you have that size deficiency, and you know that in Reed's case, you also have that weight deficiency, you almost feel like you have to nip the possession in the bud as quickly as you can, because the longer you're strung out on that island, the more likely a guy is to back you down or to get comfortable, get in a rhythm so he can hit a shot. So I am worried in the short term about how Reed will defend. But I also think I'm drafting this guy for my team in 3 or 4 years' time. I want to see how Reed develops in terms of strength through his core. And it's hard because Luka got hunted so much through this postseason, right? And at the end of the day, he weighs 230 pounds and he's 6'8". It's always going to be easier to hunt a Reed Shepherd. I just think that if you can get him in a slightly more off-ball defensive role, if you can communicate sort of pre-switching, I think that he might be that valuable in terms of event creation on defense and then amplifying your guys on offense, that I'm willing to take that step back in sort of defensive ceiling.
I think you touched on the frustration with this draft, though, where Reed Shepherd, even Ron Holland, you guys have ranked at first, and you just said, I'd be taking him for 3 years from now. And unfortunately for Atlanta, they got to draft a guy for now. And that's the trouble with this draft, is there just really isn't a lot of for now guys.
Definitely not at the top. Like Emmett, I completely understand having Ron number 1. I've heard a lot of different people that I really respect, like Hoop Intellect was on the Sam Vecini pod today, and it was great to see a guy that mainly sort of does his content on YouTube get to interact with the Athletic and like proper pro journalist circles. That was really fun. I think he has Ron Holland too. What's your idea of what Ron can be sort of immediately? Do you think it will be a car crash, or do you think some structure will maybe help, which he's definitely not played in structure this year, has he?
No, I think watching his Ignite film is definitely tricky to really gauge that. And he's also young. I mean, I think he's about to turn 19. So he's one of the youngest players in this draft, because even though there are a decent amount of like 1 year players, there are a lot of 3-year college guys. There's a lot of 4-year college guys, and they're super young. And that's the thing. It's like Andrew was saying, like, I think it might take a few years for him to get where he needs to be. But I think if he can develop as a passer more, which it looks like he was starting to a little bit, like flashing of passing, I think he could affect a team off the bench to start. But again, like if we're taking, I not necessarily boards have to line up with who's getting picked 1 through whatever. Like, just because you have a guy number 1 doesn't mean obviously you think he should go number 1. Because I don't think the Hawks should necessarily take Ron Holland. But I think if you're looking for a draft now player, it's probably not the player you're going to go with. But I think it's maybe a few years, and what has just made me so encouraged about him is his size and his ability to do those other things that usually players don't do at his size. And he's 19 years old, which in a draft like this, I think a big place you can look to is drafting a younger player to develop.
Yeah, completely. And Andrew, like you said, there are not a lot of guys at the very top that you think can win now. And that has led to, I'm never going to call anything a wild take with this draft, because if you're someone I respect and you're putting that opinion out there, fair play. You think that. I don't know more than you. I'm not going to push back on it too much, but I've seen talk about guys like Devin Carter, who's 22 years old, potentially being the best player available at 4 for the San Antonio Spurs with their first guard pick. It's like, this guy was in the 20s a month and a half ago. When March Madness was happening, this guy was in the 20s. And I know that guys can look good in the gym. I know that guys can sort of measure well at the combine, but you've had all of this tape before. And I think that this really is going to be the struggle, especially for a team like Atlanta. And I think that's probably why they've lent into Clignan. If they stay at 1, Clignan absolutely makes sense, especially for the history of Quinn Snyder with that Rudy Gobert defense. You know, if you can park a 7'2" behemoth in the paint, then maybe we start to see some instant results.
Well, and I look at Atlanta of Trae Young's used to playing with the Clint Capella, and if you can get a better version of Clint Capella, if you're keeping that roster the same, Clignan makes a lot of sense. Myself personally, again, not a huge college basketball guy, but I just love Stephen Castle. A lot of swagger, a lot of moxie. That's you know what? If I'm going to bet on someone and there's just a kind of a random chance it's going to work out, I'm going to bet on the guy that's shit talking the whole game.
I really like Stephon Castle, and I think it's Kevin O'Connor who has him as his number 1 on his draft board. And I think what he talked about a lot with Castle is that he does a lot of things good, but nothing great. And I think
which is the problem I brought up.
I was going to say, Andrew, that's almost what you brought up, is there's that elite thing, like where are you finding it? But he is a very controlling player, as in like he can control the tempo of the game, but he can't shoot the ball really well. And it's another player who I think he did not shoot well in high school or his freshman year. And that's like a thing almost you can look at is like, if we can get someone in who can make him shoot well, then that's a really good thing. And he's a really good defender. And like, he's got that proverbial like dog, like he's got that dog in him, like you're saying. So I think that will maybe make players lean towards him, but I also think he's a player that could.
And I think this season, or if this draft, that's how I would almost approach it, is personality pick. Who do I think has the best chance to make it? Or international. I mean, these dudes that have been playing internationally since they were like 12 or 13, at least you know they have battle scars on them, and you know that they can play with adults. Outside of that, I mean, it's going to be like you guys are saying, it's going to be a lot of people drafting first, second, third overall and finding out in summer league that, oh shoot, this guy's going to have to play off the bench or be in the G League, which looks really bad when you're the Wizards taking Johnny Davis, but maybe it'll look better if, you know, the Hawks decide to blow it up or something.
The good thing about the Wizards this year is, who the hell could they pick that would play for their G League team? Right?
No one.
Tristan Vukovic was getting minutes towards the end of the season, and I went back because I'm a big Brett Usher fan. He's a guy that posts and like gives a lot of shine to loads and loads of players around the league, and he sort of did one of those posts where he's like, "Look out for Tristan Vukovic." But you watch the tape, and my God, man, that guy to be getting starting center minutes is worrying. So I think that whoever they draft actually has some real runway. But Emmett, you've got Ron Holland at 1 on your board. Who would you be picking at 1 for Atlanta?
I would say Clignan. That's probably where I'm at. I have Clignan 2 on my board. So I think that's where he slides the best. Like what we're saying is putting that big guy in the paint. And I don't really know what. I mean, you hear different reports about why he wouldn't work out with the team. You hear a lot of stuff about he didn't think he would fit with the team, this and that. And I think that if they're going to set their sights away from him and they're going to look at, okay, I saw, it's either Richisar or it's Clignan, I'm definitely going to go Clignan there because I just think he's a little bit more proven. And I think that's really what Trae Young needs if we're sticking with Trae Young. Now, if they're not going to stick with Trae Young, then I think that's a whole different category. But I'm in the Trae Young boat. I think he's very overhated and underrated. And I think they should stick with Trae Young. And I think the player you put next to him is Clignan just based on his body of work. Like we saw at UConn. I mean, obviously that UConn team was amazing, but the way he was able to affect the game all throughout March Madness, all throughout the Final Four, that's just a player I would want on my team. Like just sometimes you don't overcomplicate it. Like just don't think about it too hard sometimes.
I would be with Clignan as well. Again, my thought process would be, if you're keeping Trae, Dwayne Dedmon, he's used to playing with a rim running big that plays good defense. Unfortunately, with Trae, you kind of have to. At the same time, I mean, if San Antonio is willing to bite for this pick and you can get like a Keldon Johnson or trade DeJounte Murray back and get some pieces, Atlanta's just in a crappy spot, though, because it doesn't seem like anyone on their team likes each other, which is just tough. It's tough when you don't like your colleagues.
Yeah, that is tough. Jack, I wanted to get your opinion on a player that I have watched a decent amount of, but I'm not quite sure about, which is Kel'el Ware from Indiana. I've seen him a lot higher on some recent boards. Like I've seen him I just don't. I think we briefly had like a thing we talked about on Twitter, just in the comment section of what we think he is, and I was like shades of Porzingis maybe. But I just want, what do you think, and where do you think his best fit would be for a team to draft him?
Yeah, so Kel'el Ware is probably my guy in this class. Like I don't think he should go 1. I don't even necessarily think he should go 5. I was invited to take part in a mock draft for oh my god, what do you call it? For the Substack that Keith Smith runs along with Trevor Lane, and Bryce Simon does some work there as well. And he had me drafting for the Portland Trail Blazers, and it was that pick at 14. And every mock I'd seen had been like, oh, they'll take Kyle Filipowski here. And this was maybe a month and a half ago, so this was pre-combine. A lot of places had Kel'el Ware more as like an early second rounder because there'd been questions over his effort. But I think that Kel'el Ware is the definition of an upside swing. And the thing that I wrote when I made that pick was, you're picking a guy that could potentially be James Wiseman in the hope that he's what we thought James Wiseman would be, if that makes sense. And I just think that he's not necessarily played in the most favorable conditions in Indiana. He's not played with a great guard creator, which when you look at a 7-foot rim running big who jumps out the gym, look at what Derek Lively did, this season with Dallas. He's obviously playing with the best pick and roll creator. But if you get Kel'el Ware with an actual NBA level pick and roll creator, I think he's one of the very few guys in the draft that has the potential to both be a high level rim runner, a high level drop defender, and a potential spacer from 3, because he shot 42% from 3 this season on low volume, admittedly. And then I think his free throw percentage was around the mid 60s. But he's also got quite sweet touch from floater range. And in this season in Indiana, where he potentially struggled to get all the way to the basket because Indiana didn't necessarily have the players he respects, so the paint was clogged, he had to lean on that floater a little bit. But I see touch, I see a willingness to shoot from 3, and I see insane athletic skills. So for me, I think like the probably like the best fit. I really like him on Portland if they're ever going to move away from DeAndre Ayton, because I think long term, when we spoke about Anthony Edwards at the top of the pod, I think it would be really, really helpful for Scoot Henderson to be playing with a guy that can not only rim run, but a guy that can pop beyond the 3-point line. So my gut, but we'll see. I think that wherever he is, he's a real high variance outcome to me. What do you think, Emmett?
Yeah, so you kind of took the words right out of my mouth about him at Indiana. I don't know how much Indiana basketball you watched because I wouldn't suggest watching a lot of Indiana basketball from last year. I think they had 3 games where they made 0 3-pointers, which is nuts, which is like just ridiculous. Like they would shoot like 8 a game, which is just so silly. So I just don't think he was able to really showcase his ability to get to the paint, like you were saying. And I think exactly what I was thinking was Portland for sure, right there at 14. I think he just fits if they're going to move on from Aiden, which I think they should, that he just fits in their route. And I think you kind of hit it on nail on the coffin of just high upside. If we're going to look at this draft as like players with, yes, maybe a lot of low floor, okay, then let's draft someone who has a potential to be a very high upside young player, which is Khalil Ware. So I'm glad you're in the same boat of liking him.
Yeah, 100%, man. I'm there on Ware Island. I've been there for a little while now. And another guy who I don't necessarily think he's like the guard version of Khalil Ware, because I think he's a little higher regarded, and he's probably like higher up draft boards. But Rob Dillingham has been one of my guys in this class since that video went round last year, which is maybe the best 2-minute highlight video I've ever seen. I think he was playing for Overtime Elite. The commentary was insane. It was like he had his takeover on 2K. But I think he's another high variance player because you don't often see guys of that size stick around in the league. I want to ask you two as Wolves fans, you maybe have the biggest pound for pound team in the league. What do you think about when you see, so-and-so is going to draft a 6'1" point guard in the lottery to sort of lead their team? Are you just thinking they're, lambs to the slaughter? Or if a guy is good enough, is he good enough?
I think he's good. If he's good enough, he's going to be fine. I mean, there's Jalen Brunson. I mean, he carved everyone up, and he's not 6 foot. Like he isn't.
Yeah.
He wears a lot of socks. I mean, what I would say is if it is going to be a guard in the Western Conference, I mean, they're going to have to deal with Doncic. They're going to have to deal with Edwards. They're going to have to deal with size. I mean, even Murray for Denver is a bigger bodied guard. So I think that the NBA is starting to trend back to kind of the early mid 2000s size type of thing, where every team's going to need a 7-foot center and a 6'8", 6'9" power forward. I think guards, if they're good enough, they're going to figure it out. But it's going to be interesting.
I agree. I think if someone's walking around, okay, let's just set the scene here. If someone's walking around with a petition saying, who wants to get Rob Dillingham's jersey first? I'm putting my name right at the front of it. I think what you're saying, when the player has it, he has it. And I think he really has it. And I understand when I try to take the bias away from it and look at it, like you're saying, a high variance player, as he did struggle a lot with turnovers in college. He as a crazy player, as someone who does a lot on the court, he's going to do that. But I also think he played in a really strange role at Kentucky coming off the bench. And, I don't know if you can say it worked or not, because they didn't go very far. But I think as a player, he just has it. He can create as well as I've seen a player in a long time be able to shoot the ball. And I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you have it. I mean, he's 6'1". I think his wingspan's 6'3", so he's small. He's a little guy. But what you're saying, like, I think that thing that caught me his eye is that overtime video that I probably saw on TikTok with some corny song in the background of him just hitting the nastiest shots. And I think if you compare him on a team with someone really good next to him at the 2 guard, the big defensive 2 guard, I don't see why he couldn't prosper into like a really good player. And I think his playmaking definitely needs to come up there a little bit. But again, if you put a 2 guard next to him, or even the NBA is so fluid now that like he could technically be at the shooting guard position. Like it doesn't really matter in that sense. But if you have a guy who can play defense and play make next to Rob Dillingham, I do not see why he couldn't be an all-star level player.
Yeah, and I think that it goes like one of the first things that should be said. Yes, Reed Shepherd shot 52% from 3 this season. Rob Dillingham shot 44% from 3. And again, some of his, one of the best videos I saw going around this year was Cam Johnson on JJ Redick's podcast speaking about sort of squaring up to the basket as you're going right for a movement three. I think that it's not even like the shot mechanics with Dillingham. It's almost the shot preparation and it's the fluidity of the footwork. And you sort of see that translate into his handle and you see that translate into some of the finishing around the basket. Emmett, I really didn't see another player this year that tried more reverse layups. I swear to God, he probably could have made more normal layups, but he's like, I'm finishing reverse. I really don't care.
I mean,
I really love Dillingham, and I would like to see him. Like, I know that you spoke about the idea of pairing him with another bigger guard defender. I want to see him in a system where he can thrive both on ball and off ball. I don't want to see the Trae Youngification of Rob Dillingham.
Sure.
So if he could get to a spot like Utah, where everyone is encouraged to both like screen, bring the ball up, run off for pin downs, that's what I want to see. Because sometimes you almost have to take advantage of the fact that guys are a little bit smaller. Who are you going to have guarding Rob Dillingham? If you run 1-4 pick and roll with Rob Dillingham and Lowry Markkinen, you're never switching that in a million years because you're just going to die regardless of what way that switch goes. So defensively, like, yes, there are concerns, but as a creation swing and as one of the more fun players in the draft, I think if he gets somewhere where you're not just leaning into the Rob Dillingham show, where you're almost constraining him a little bit, I want to see how that talent focuses.
Oh, I agree. And I think what impressed me a lot in Kentucky was his catch and shoot. I think obviously we saw him create a lot. I mean, he shot a few times, he's falling out of bounds shooting 3-pointers. And I'm like, this dude is just nuts, which is electric, which you love. But his catch and shoot was amazing. Like, he can just square up, he catches ball, which a lot of those point guards, there's two guards can't do a lot. Like, not that Anthony Edwards cannot shoot off catch and shoot, but he doesn't like it. Like, you see him, he resets his dribble a lot when he catches the ball. But Rob he just flings that thing up there, and he's got a quick jumper. I mean, I really like to look at players' jump shots and how, like you were saying, it's not necessarily the mechanics, but I think he has really good mechanics, which I think is really helpful. And he shoots it quick, and that's something you need as a smaller guard. And it might be wrong to say where I want him, and I do not like this organization, but is it wrong to say I want him on the Bulls? Like, is that bad to say I want him next to Kobe White?
Kobe White, Josh Giddey, Rob Dillingham backcourt is like, that feels like a few years into a 2K simulation, a little bit like the trade finder's gone a little bit wild. but there is this nice idea with Kobe and with Rob of having two almost tangent guards, two guards that don't necessarily operate as heliocentric guys, but you can station them on opposite sides of the floor. And while one of them creates, the other one is having gravity off ball, and they can take advantage of whatever the other guy creates on the other side of the floor. So I think that they'd be really fun. Personally, I think Josh Giddey maybe messes that up a little bit because how many bad guard defenders can we have on one team?
I think I decided that like too soon. Like I think I decided I wanted him there before he got traded there. But okay, so if we're going down the list, so if we think Clignan's going to go number one, or we want him to go number one, and then do you think Sarr goes two?
Yeah, it sounds like it. Like I would genuinely be really tempted to take Reed at 2 if I was Washington, but I get the upside of Sarr. I think he is a higher upside player, and I don't think we need to go over Reed again. And then the Rockets are reported to take Reed. I think
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. At
Andrew,
4, you'd assume it's like Reed, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna kick it to Andrew. Andrew, what do you think Houston needs at 3? What do you think? Not necessarily looking at a player, but what do you think they need?
They need to trade it. They just need to trade the pick. Like, I hate to say it, but like Houston, I mean, they have the Thompson. They have can't think of his name now. Sengun. They have size. Yeah. They have ball handlers. I mean, they just need veteran presence. They almost made the playoffs last year. They don't really need a project. So, I mean, if they can get, even if it's just a mid-level guy, like let's say they're a part of a 3-way trade and they get like a Tobias Harris back, or they get just someone that can play 28 minutes and be competent, I think that's what Houston needs more than just the 3rd overall pick in a crapshoot draft. Just my 2 cents. I think it's almost the same with San Antonio, though. I think they also, like, they don't need another draft pick this year. They need a point guard. And if that number 4 pick can get him a point guard, Like they got to do it. So I don't know. It's almost even going down the line to like Detroit too. Like they don't really need another young guy. They have Cade, they have Sazer, they have a Thompson twin. They need a veteran. They need a capable player. I wouldn't be surprised if like three out of the top 7 picks get traded pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can see that. Jack, what do you think about 3? Are you on the boat of trade it, or if you let's just play it this way: if they have to pick, who are they taking?
Yeah, if they have to pick, for me, it would probably be Reed. But if you wanted to go another direction, it's hard. Then not a Reece Shea team. You do have to consider, I think, that Fred VanVleet has a team option at the end of this year. So unless you really believe in like an Amen Thompson, Jalen Green backcourt, you maybe want to plan ahead a little bit for the future. And one guy that has absolutely slid down draft boards, and I think that if they made this pick on draft night, it would look a little bit embarrassing because of where he's being mocked currently. I do get the idea of Nikola Topic going to Houston because he really sort of fits their draft philosophy that they've exhibited over the last couple of years. Like if you look at some of the picks that they've made, tell me if you see a common thread between Jabari Smith Jr., Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason, Amen Thompson, Jalen Green. These are all guys that can really sort of jump out the gym. These are all guys that, aside from Jalen Green, are sort of plus size at their position. Topic is 6'6", and his elite skill has been his ability to get downhill. He's got real burst, and he's a really, really good pick and roll operator. And while like I've a lot of guys that have watched far more Mega and far more Partisan, or sorry, Red Star than me this season, have said that he's an absolutely woeful defender. If you're taking a 19-year-old who's potentially recovering from surgery, and you're just saying, go and watch Fred VanVleet, go and be in this defensive culture, I like the idea of having him as your long-term swing there.
Oh, yeah. I think Topic is interesting. I think also the thing that just concerns me about him is his jumper, which is like been a known thing. I think he's just a little bit of a stiff jump shooter. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but like, I think watching a little bit of his film, admittingly not like a ton, like it looked like people sagged off him a lot. And that's just how do you see that fitting with the Rockets? And maybe that's not like an issue with shooters on the team. Like Sengun isn't like a guy who just sits in the paint, obviously. So I don't know if that would really matter, but that's just, I think, a cause of concern. But I would agree with you. I think Reed has to be the pick there if they're drafting.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, to your point about like getting a vet in, what do you think about this sort of general balance? I feel like we've seen so many teams tank over the last few years that a lot of teams end up in this San Antonio, Detroit, Houston situation where they have a ton of young guys on the roster. And it's like, well, how do we develop them all? Would you... I get the idea of wanting a vet in the room, but part of me almost thinks if Houston trades the pick, like, can we punt that asset down the line? Can we get future picks back so we can make an absolute superstar trade while also allowing our young guys to develop? Because like there's only so many minutes that core can play, and to me they have 6 guys that I really want to see on the floor. And then they have Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks. I'm not going to say Jock Landale was a key piece that has to play, but you get my point. Like, they already have some slightly older guys.
I mean, I look at the Houston situation. I mean, I just brought up their roster, and it's Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, Jalen Green, Alfred Şengün, Jabari Smith, the Thompson twin, Tari Eason. I mean, they have a roster that's pretty ready. Yeah. I wonder if they would be able to go, here's number 3, here's Jabari Smith, here's Steven Adams' salary filler. Let's go try and get a Brandon Ingram to bring in and bolster a roster. Paul George, if he just wants cash, Houston has cash. Like I said with Tobias Harris, I mean, I think Tobias Harris coming off the bench for 26 minutes, just another professional, gives them a higher ceiling. Punting the asset also makes a lot of sense because if you're able to trade this one for like a first and 3 seconds in future drafts, it just gives you more flexibility. I guess I just don't know what player they would draft that would get minutes or help this team immediately, unless they strike gold. But a lot of these players, at least from somebody who doesn't watch a lot of college ball, seem like they're 2 or 3 years away. And I think Houston is in a let's see if we can do what Oklahoma City did and get deep into the playoffs and see what our team is.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Emmett, what do you go on?
I also feel the same with Detroit, though, of they just have a lot of pieces I like. What are they going to draft that's going to get minutes? And would it make more sense for them to either punt the pick, get a veteran in, try and pair, get in the Brandon Ingram sweepstakes? I just think there's a lot of teams that would rather take a sure thing like third best player on a team than a project with how much youth they have.
Yeah. I feel so sorry for Detroit. I think that they've made real strides in the last few weeks, even like obviously getting rid of Monty. What a move by Monty, by the way. I reckon that he probably could have coached them to like 28 wins this year, but he probably sensed that he was able to retire with $65 million in the bank. And he was like, screw that. I'm not living in Michigan for the next 5 years of my life. I'm getting out of there. I'm going to Hawaii. But they've brought in Fred Vincent, who is like maybe one of the most valuable role player front office members or like coaching members you can ever get. He's the shooting coach from the New Orleans Pelicans, who has success stories with like Lonzo Ball, with Herb Jones, with Brandon Ingram, a guy that you just mentioned. I think that they really need shooting, and all of the mock drafts that I've listened to have been like, oh, well, if they can trade back to, maybe where Memphis is picking, and then they can pick up Dalton Connect, who is a more senior player who can shoot, who's a little bit of a professional bucket getter, then that's great. But I almost wonder, like, if everyone says you should trade down, what the hell are you even going to get for trading down? Do they just end up taking Dalton at 5 and just saying, here's our known quantity, Andrew, and at least he's on a rookie contract for the next 4 years?
I think that's the bet. I will say new head coach, at least he's not going to have the loyalties to like a Jaden Ivey or some of the Quentin Grimes, some of the players that were brought in there that were getting minutes that probably shouldn't get minutes. If I was Detroit, I would start looking at this of we got to figure out what Cade is. When he's healthy, he's great. When he's hurt, he's not. What can we get in here that maybe won't make us win 42 games, but it'll make us win like 35? And we can at least see if we want to sign Cade to the meg. I mean, he's going to get a max after next year. That being said, new head coach syndrome. It may be as simple as new head coach is in love with a guy and just wants to draft him.
Yeah. I think I'm on the opposite side of both of you with the Pistons. I think they should just swing at someone. Like, I really think they should. And I really like Cody Williams there for them. I think I know that's, again, exactly the opposite of what you're saying that you think they should do, in a sense of like getting a player who's had a very weird last season. He played one season at Colorado, but I think he has a really impressive kit. He has a really impressive defensive toolkit. And again, I understand the idea of wanting to win some games to see what you have in Cade, to see what you have in these players. But at the end of the day, if you're in the middle, what's the point? What's the point of sitting in the middle and winning 38 games, getting the playing spot? And again, it's a draft that it's considered lower by people, but I really think that if they swing at someone, what do you really have to lose as the Pistons? There's nothing to lose at this point. Like, you've been so bad for so long. Like, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't have any big questions about Cade Cunningham. Like, I think they should sign him. Like, I'm a very big supporter of Cade Cunningham. So go swing at someone down low who can get you some of that elite defensive presence at the bottom. And I think that's Cody Williams. So just to I'm just on the opposite side of that. I think they should draft here.
So Emmett, you're Tim Conley, and you're sitting here having a lovely Sunday afternoon, and Detroit calls and says, number 4 and Cade for Cat.
Oh, I'm taking that 100 times.
Okay.
I'm a really big Cade Cunningham believer, and I think he's just been in a very unfortunate situation. Absolutely, you give me Cade Cunningham every day of the week, 7 days. I love Cat, but oh my gosh, I would
You'd be driving to Target Center to fax the paperwork on a Sunday.
I would be grabbing my second phone that Tim Connolly has and calling the NBA office being like, we have to get this dude right now.
Andrew, I thought you were going to say Jaden Ivey, and then you went Cade. I was like, oh my God. I think that he must be one of the most hardest to gauge players in the league, because I was listening to the ball mock draft. All that you guys are getting from this is that I listen to way too many podcasts. But
that's fine.
I think that they traded like the number 4 pick, the Spurs pick, and Keldon Johnson and a future first for Cade Cunningham. And I was just sat there like, this is daylight robbery. This is absolutely insane.
Exactly.
But
I mean, I was setting it up as I'm trying to gauge where your cat value is, because I don't think he's moving. From what I've heard, it's the team's decision. He wants to stay here. But I think the last time we talked, I was floating out like a Keldon Johnson and a pick trade. And you were also like, yes.
I just think, I mean, if it's Cade Cunningham, there's just no way you don't do that. You are very like silly if you don't do that. I think Cade is an amazing player. And I think that if it's like Keldon and a pick, you definitely have to think about fit and value. Because I think a lot of times with Cat, we talked about how can you get value back for him as an offensive player and just as a player in general. If you're getting Cade Cunningham, you're getting value back. That's like every day of the week I'm doing that.
I guess I just have a different Cade Cunningham value.
Yeah, you must.
He's just been hurt so much. And if I'm looking to build a team to win a championship, I just am really leery of guys that haven't played more than 30, 35 games in a season.
I mean, it's fair.
I'm a big LaMelo Ball guy, so I can hardly come in and trash Cade Cunningham's injury record. But that
segues us in. What do you think about the Hornets?
The Hornets are just found money regardless, because I think that they have two. So if you're the new Hornets front office and you say we're married to LaMelo and obviously we're married to Brandon Miller, then I think that they have two future 1-2 pieces that allow you to kind of go any direction. Like if you told me that they were bringing in Alex Sarr to play next to Mark Williams in a jumbo-sized front court, that's great. If you told me that they were bringing in Ricochet and they were going to be one of the few teams in the Eastern Conference that has 2 plus-size wings at either the 2 and the 3 or the 3 and the 4, that's absolutely fine by me. Cody Williams, another guy that I think is maybe worth a bet there. So they are just it's really weird, because I feel like they're probably actually set to step back, and it's really rare that we see a team step back when they haven't even made the play-in the last couple of seasons. But I think that the fact that they bought out Kyle Lowry last season, the fact that they moved off guys like Terry Rozier and PJ Washington, I think they're going to be god-awful next year. And I think that's probably the best thing for the franchise. So go and get maybe your highest upside guy. If that's a Ron Holland destination, that's fantastic. But I also really understand the idea of saying Zachary Ricochet played nearly 70 games in France this year and he shot 40% from 3. That is a really useful piece to have next to our other guys that we probably want to have the ball a little bit more.
So Emmett, real quick. Cade played 64 games, 12 games, and 62, so not 35. Apologize to Cade coming in.
Yeah, come on. What are we doing?
Okay, so you're Tim Conley. You're enjoying a mint julep, let's say, on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. And Charlotte calls, and they say, we're kicking the tires. What's your thoughts on the number 6 and LaMelo for Cat?
I'm doing it again. There's just no I'm not doing it, because then I can get, if I'm getting 6 and Cody Williams is there and I can get both of them onto the Timberwolves, I don't see why you don't do that. Which would be an insane backcourt, by the way. Just a nutty back. To that point, I think that the Hornets could do well with a Stephen Castle here, which is Andrew, a guy you said you liked. I think if you're going to stick with the LaMelo thing and the Brandon Miller thing, which I don't know why you wouldn't, maybe a Stephen Castle is the guy you pair with him.
I'm going to continue to throw cat trades at you. That's my bit. That's my bit for this podcast.
Okay, we're just going down we're just really just going down the board here. So now we get to Portland at 7. Okay, wait, we didn't really talk San Antonio at 4. If they Jack, if they have, who do you think fits best there if they have to pick? Again, like they can't trade the pick, hypothetical.
Yeah, so Andrew, I disagree on they need veterans in the room, just because like one of the few things I wrote this year was about this floor v ceiling approach for San Antonio. Mm-hmm. And like Daryl Morey has spoken in the past about the idea of, is it better to have more rolls of the dice, or is it better to have higher odds when you're rolling the dice, if that makes sense? So if they, again, choose to really take their time and try and build out a young core and make 2 lottery selections this year, yes, maybe they're like missing the play-in, even though you have maybe like a top 15 guy in the league in his second year. But long term, I think that really increases their championship window on the back end, because it sort of clears their salary cap issues. Like if you go and trade for a veteran that you've got to pay now, suddenly you've got Devin Vassell making $30 million. You've got whoever that guy is, and then you know that you're going to be paying Wemby a 30% max whenever he signs his contract extension. So I like the idea of like a guard and a wing here. Go and pick your favorite guard. Go and pick your favorite wing. So Matas is a guy that really makes sense, even though I think that there's a lot of overlap with Jeremy Sohan, because if they really believe that his shot is more like what you said right at the top of the podcast, Emmett, if he's shooting like, I think he shot 43% at Sunrise Christian, which would be an insane outcome. So if he's somewhere in between, if he shoots 36% and he's a really good backline protector for his size, I love his personality. I think that he's really feisty. And I think that you even see it in some of the buckets that you got for the G League Ignite this year. Like he clearly was playing with a real strength disadvantage, yet he'd go to the mid post and he'd try and sort of hit the MJ fadeaways that you love to see. And it's like, oh my God, man, you're 20 feet away from the basket here. So he's a guy that I think if his body develops right, he's really got a lot of tools. But I'm in other group chats that say the only thing that Matas does well is like, he's a good secondary rim protector and he gets out in transition. They don't rate any of his other skills. And Andrew, you spoke about having to have an elite skill. What if you've got none and you're just sort of this 6'10" frame and a really good kid? It's like, how the hell do you balance those things out?
Then you're stuck with them for 3 years.
Yes.
Because everyone in the locker room loves them. And I mean, we're dealing with that in Minnesota right now with Emmett. I think you're a fan of his, but Josh Minot. Everyone loves him. He can jump really high and he's really fast. He can't shoot defense. He gambles and makes a lot of mistakes. He's a poor passer, but everyone in that locker room loves him. So he'll be here next year. And it's tough when that happens, because then it's just kind of like, well, maybe. I guess I can see what you're saying with the Spurs and continuing the young development. I just worry with you. Like they have team control of Wemby for like 7-8 more years. So it's not like a Wemby's going to leave them thing. I just look at Greg Popovich. I look at what they have with Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, Sohan, Trey Jones, Wemby. They have 5 competent NBA players. If they could pair the 4 and the 8 and maybe upgrade like a Devin Vassell to a Trey Young, or if they were able to do something, I think they would do it. I think they're on this Pop time clock where I'm guessing the organization probably wants to do right by Pop and get him back into the playoffs before he either retires or dies on the court, because I don't think he's ever going to retire. Emmett, I wonder what your thoughts are.
It's better to have more dice to roll. I'm telling you. Just go keep doing it. Like I think that's where I'll always be. And I really like Mattis. And this is obviously a spot where I was almost half expecting you to say Rob, Jack, because that's what a lot of people have said. And I know he could go at 8 too. Like he could slide to 8 for sure. So that's like, are you again betting on him slipping or not? But I think with Mattis, the thing that I saw the most is he's just very fluid. And I think maybe he's not exactly a Josh Minot type. Like, I think maybe that might be a little bit aggressive there. But I think he definitely, he shows the tools that he can shoot again. Like, I think he'll be able to figure that out with the help, obviously, of a good fit. And I think he's not necessarily a great playmaker in a sense, but he's a good passer, because those are two very different things. And if you can put him next to someone who can do those sorts of things, like I don't know how long Trey Jones is going to be in San Antonio, but like a Trey Jones, I think Mattis could really thrive in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, like, Mattas had Ron Holland running the show, and Ron Holland was 18. And while he might be high on draft boards, like, he was not ready to run the show against G League opposition.
I love him, but he wasn't ready.
He would have looked for, I think the argument about Ron, and sorry to move away from Buzelis,
No, you're
is
good.
like,
Let's keep going.
if you put him in that UConn system and where Stephon Castle was, how the hell does he look? Because if you're creating all of these like at rim attempts and you're asking him to do a little bit less on the ball, and like, yes, the shot is really, really funky, but I think he was in his absolute worst context. And like, because he was in his worst context, Mattas was too, because that is a guy that should be getting easy buckets, or at least he should have a well-spaced floor to try and go to work and try and sort of take advantage of his frame or try and drive into the lane. So I don't know with Buzelis. Like, there are just too many mixed opinions on him. Some people think that he can't do anything. Some people think that he's a really, really high upside player. I think at 8 as well, the thing about Dillingham being mocked there is like, yes, it makes sense, but doesn't everyone make sense in San Antonio?
Yeah,
like,
right. Exactly.
You just pair everyone with a 7'5" guy that can space out to 3. That means that you can have absolutely any sort of archetype on that roster. So who knows, man? I'm excited to see what they do regardless.
No, I agree. All right. We're getting close to the time here, so we're going to go through some quick hitters of guys that I really like and I want to get your sense on. So let's just get Edey out of the way first. What do you think about Edey?
Yeah, I like him at Chicago at 11. I through doing that Levine video, I've watched a lot of Vucevic tape, and I think that he's quite a complimentary player, but the poor guy had like a 53% true shooting percentage, and he's a center. What the hell is that these days? I think that when you look at, Kobe White, who is a really, really shifty guard who can get to 3, who I think can operate on and off ball. He's one of the guys that I think could really benefit from playing with an absolutely elite screener, which is what Zach Edey is, but also a little bit more of an inside presence. I think that there is an argument that Zach Edey can come in and he can generate high level offense if he has the right guys that can get in the ball. So there's almost an argument like space the court for him and see what the hell the ceiling is, because I think at minimum, he just absolutely mauls second units. Like, you're not really going to be able to go small against him unless you have elite shooting. Right. So take that gamble in a really flat draft, see what the 7'4", 300-pound guy can do. And that's a guy that came to basketball really late as well, because I think he wanted to be a baseball player up until he was like 16. And I don't watch a lot of baseball, but how would a 7'4" guy look at the plate?
A bit nuts. A bit nuts. There's some 6'9" guys in the MLB, and that's nuts.
Yeah, that would have been really fun. What do you guys think of Zach Edey?
What do you think, Andrew?
I mean, I'll just be honest. It just seems kind of like it's going to be like a Walker Kessler center that doesn't really have a home offensively, can screen and play defense, and he might end up just being a Plumlee brother that plays in the league for 14 years and gets 12 minutes a game. If he were to lean into being that pick and fade, pick and roll, develop a shot, he rolls well, but it's just tough with him because there's a huge bust potential where goes into an NBA camp and it's like, holy cow, this guy is not athletic enough. This guy's not good enough at footwork. This guy can't be like a help side defender. He chases blocks, and then he's out of the league in a flash. I honestly think his long-term thing, though, is he's going to be just a backup big that plays for 10, 11 years. If he gets a shot, like if he can really hone down a quick jumper, like a 3 jumper, not just like a mid-range, and that sticks for him, that'd be great. But I guess I just don't believe that's –
yeah.
I don't believe in it. Like I just don't believe in the Zach Edey experience.
I think Yeah, go, Jack.
Could we quickly go back to the Walker Kessler comparison? Because I think that that's a really interesting one to make. Like, Walker Kessler is, by a lot of metrics, the best pound for pound rim defender in the league, or rim protector in the league. And he was still coming off the bench for the Utah Jazz because they wanted to play that 5-out system. I think that the reason why Walker Kessler isn't a 30-minute a game player is that when he gets a mismatch, or when he's even 5 feet, 7 feet out from the basket, he's not really adept at punishing the mismatch and using his size.
Mm-hmm.
And if I've seen anything of Edey, it's that if you were to get him the ball in that position, I think personally that ball is going in the hoop. So if you can sort of let me make the argument for why he is a higher level than what you've said, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But
for sure.
If he provides you good drop rim protection, because he is absolutely massive, if he's massive on the boards for you on both sides, if he's a great screener that can get your guards free, and if, very importantly, he's able to punish when a team switches, or he's able to prevent a switch, then I think that's a guy that can potentially long-term start in the NBA. Obviously, when you get to the playoffs, it would be really, really funny to see him have to guard out on the perimeter. But the thing about Kessler is I'm so frustrated when I watch him, because I think you should be like a top 15 center in the league, because he's strangely switchable. Like, for a 7-foot guy, I think that his footwork is really, really good. And I think that he actually holds up quite well in space. The actual issue is on the offensive end, where it's like, use your size, use your frame, go and throw that ball down.
My pushback, because I completely agree with everything you just said. I mean, Walker Kessler in college averaged 6 points a game. They are completely different players offensively. My pushback, as a man who loves post basketball, who grew up watching KG fades and Tim Duncan hooks, is that does not exist in the NBA anymore. And for Zach Edey, he can attack mismatches. He can back down. He has good footwork on offense. He's able to make those hook shots and power through people. That would require an offense to draw up those plays for him. And that, to me, is, at this current iteration of the NBA, that's a role player, unfortunately. A guy that's probably going to get 15 minutes a night. Because if you match him up with a ball-handling guard, analytics says that a pick and roll or a pick and pop shot is better than a post up oftentimes. And I just don't think he would get that opportunity. If he was drafted in 2005, I think he would be a all-star caliber player, just based off of his side and post skills. Yeah. But in this current NBA, I mean, truly, how many just post up offensive players are there?
But what if he can then go and do the Steven Adams thing, where he is an elite screen setter? Mm-hmm. So in terms of guard play, yes, he's not necessarily the most vertical lob threat, which is crazy to say when a guy's 7'4". But he is going to be able to pry you open in the mid range in a way that I think Steven Adams does, and a way that I think Jakob Poeltl does, and that's been really good for guards that have looked to develop their pick and roll game over the years. And my thought is, he's always been a menace on the offensive glass. So even if you aren't drawing up those plays for him, I think that something insane, 50% of his rebounds were offensive rebounds over his senior year. How many points do you need him to score to be out there if they're putbacks, and if it's just our guards get easier looks when he's on the court?
My pushback is Steven Adams over his career averages 26 minutes a game.
Okay, fair enough.
So even if best case scenario is he is Steven Adams, that's still the 5th guy on a team and 26 minutes a night, which is just, I hope it works out for I don't have any ill will to him. I actually really appreciate the post up. The NBA is just so different now that unless he can develop a 3-point shot, or unless he can develop into a Rudy Gobert caliber defender, I do just kind of see him as like a 15-minute-a-night guy, which is
Feels
tough.
like
And it's really hard because it's like he is an incredible college player. He has a very good post setup. It's just that the games kind of passed him by.
This feels like a tie break at Wimbledon, and we could very, very easily go back and forth for half an hour and just not let Emmett speak for the rest of the podcast.
We certainly can't. And I see Emmett over there, like the fans in Wimbledon, just his head going back and forth.
Push back to the pushback. Push back to the pushback.
So, Emmett, you are the ref in this tennis match.
We're just done with him. I have nothing more to add. You just took every word out of my mouth. It's okay.
You're not even picking a side.
I can't pick a side anymore. That's a different podcast. If you want to pick a side, go listen to that one. But okay, we have a few more players I want to touch on, then we're going to do the Timberwolves quick, and then we're out of here. Okay. One guy I want to go to bat for is Isaiah Collier, and I want to know your opinion on him. I think he's great in the pick and roll. I think if he can get someone who he can play downhill with, he's going to be really good. And I think the turnover numbers were a big issue, and his consistency is a big issue. But I really think he's dynamic, and he's a tank. He's built like a tank, like he's built like a linebacker. And I think if you can put him in a good position where he can succeed, I don't see why he can't where he can't succeed. And time and time again in his highlights, again, he played for a team that I think when you look at players that played 1 year in college, you have to look at the players that were built around them. And I don't think USC put him in the position to succeed at all. But every time he got to the hoop, he could finish the basketball, and he's going to get you a paint touch every time he drives. And I think that's a player that I personally want on my team. And if you can mold him and put him in the right fit, I think he's going to be really good. And I just want to know what you think about Collier.
Right. Sorry, I am scrolling through my phone because I spoke about Collier. I think I've been really positive through this podcast, and I generally try and see like the upper end outcome for guys. But Collier is probably the one guy that, compared to consensus, I'm lower on.
Okay.
And I'm going to make a succinct point, hopefully, and say, imagine, think back to the starting backcourts that we saw in the second round of the playoffs this year. You've got Tyrese Halliburton and Andrew Nembhard, Derek White and Drew Holiday, Luka, Kyrie, Shea, and towards the end it was Isaiah Joe, but you can include Josh Giddey in there. I'm going to be missing guys out. Anthony Edwards and Mike Conley. Who else have we got? The East. Yeah, Jamal Murray and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Even if we've missed a couple of guys out, aside from Josh Giddey, every one of those guys are massive plus shooters. And I think that the highest levels of basketball, you would need a really, really specialized team for Isaiah Collier, or you really need to believe in the shot. So I don't necessarily know if the shot is going to come round. So personally, like, while I can see all the things that you've mentioned, Emmett, and I don't think that is a misevaluation, my personal basketball philosophy is I don't want to take negative shooters at the guard position, especially when they're undersized as well. I just think that's chopping a little bit off my ceiling. But if you want to turn around and say, I think in the next few years he'll shoot, absolutely makes sense as a lot.
Exactly what I was going to say. Just if you want to do a little more pushback, I just think, again, to hammer that is just, I don't think the team around him at USC allowed him to succeed. And I don't think it allowed him to be a plus shooter. And I think it also forced him to be a little reckless with the players he had around him, aka why he had so many turnovers. And I think, again, he's a project player for sure. And I think to your point, I exactly agree. Every player that was in the playoffs could shoot the ball and could shoot it at a high clip, but he's also 19 years old. And I think he has, again, the mechanical form of a good shooter. And I think that's what has made me really attached to him. But I completely get what you're saying, just from a team aspect of if he's going to get drafted in the teens or the 20s, something like that, and that's a team that's playoff ready, debatably, is that a player you really want to bring onto your team? I get that completely.
Yeah, that's my one thing. Like, who've we got next? Because I really think that I've seen a lot of guys say, like, they've got Isaiah Collier over Matas Buzelis on their boards. Like, he is a good basketball player already. He's good at a lot of things.
Yeah.
Go out there and pick him.
For sure.
Whereas I just tend to lean a little bit more towards, like, I led on here with Reed Shepherd as my number one guy, because I think that he's going to make everyone's lives easier massively on the offensive end. Whereas I think that Collier probably, like, for all of the good things that he brings, in my opinion, if the shot doesn't come around, it's going to make things a bit more difficult.
For sure. All right, enough said. All right, one more guy that I really like is Day'Ron Holmes from Dayton, who's an older guy. I think he's 22. He's more of like, I guess you could say throwback big. There you go, Andrew. He can switch a lot on defense. He's a really good roller into the oops. And I think he could really affect a team at a high level. And I know a lot of people like him, but I also know a lot of people don't like him. So what do you think, Jack?
Yeah, so I've turned around and I've seen so many people have like their Day'Ron Holmes stuff ready. I haven't dived into him too much, but last year he led college basketball in dunks, I believe. This year he's really got into his initiation bag and he can potentially stretch out to three. I think as a philosophical pick, if you're bringing in a guy that can both be a rim runner and stretch out to three, that's going to make your guards and your initiators' lives a lot easier. And like, there's been a lot of talk about how he's a hand in glove fit for Denver at 28. I think he might go a little bit higher than that because at worst, he could be a really, really good sort of second unit player that really juices your second unit offense when you're not necessarily playing with stars. But I wouldn't say I've watched enough of him to turn around and say, he's going to be a star. He's not. But it's kind of similar to the Khalil Ware argument.
Yeah, I think he averaged 2.5 3-pointers attempted and he shot 38%, which is really encouraging. And I mean, if you want to just talk about what does he do elite, he's an elite shot blocker. He's 6'9", so he's 6'9", 6'10", I think, but he's an elite shot blocker. So again, I do like him in Denver at that slot, but I think he's going to go higher. So I think we're in agreement there.
Nice. Should we do Wolves?
Yeah, last thing we're gonna Andrew, I'll kick it to you. We have 27. Who would you want them to pick if they stick at their pick?
If they stick at their pick, it's best guard available. Sounds like Jordan McLaughlin's looking elsewhere. Monte Morris, it doesn't sound like is going to be coming back. They're gonna need a guard because if not, it's Jalen Clark, and he hasn't played in 18 months. Theoretically, I hope they try and move up. Whether it's packaging the first and the second, they have 27-37. Whether it's packaging the first and I think they have like 5 seconds over the next 3 years. But packaging something together and trying to get into the late teens and get a little bit better of a prospect. Because whoever they draft, again, I'm anticipating Kyle comes back and they get a free agent mid-level point guard to back up. Again, whatever name that is, couldn't tell you, but that's my hope for them is try to get to like 18 or 19 and then just take a stab at a backup point guard that you think has a shot to play 10 minutes this year.
Yeah, I really like Terrence Shannon here, which he's polarizing. I get it. And I also know he beat his case, but whatever. That's not the point. Just basketball aspect of it. I think he thrives a lot in transition, and I think he thrives pushing it a lot. Again, he's a bigger set guy. And I think that's obviously very, very different if we're looking to the future with Mike Conley being gone. Like Mike Conley's a small guy. He's not a big body guy. But I think Terrence Shannon is a really good defender too. And he brings that edge. Like I think he has that dog in him too. And I think I really like him here if they don't try to trade up. What do you think, Jack?
Yeah. I don't really have an issue with Terrence Shannon. I think that could be a really good pick, especially in lineups where Rudy goes to the bench and you potentially have a little bit more of an open paint, because I think that the worst game that Terrence Shannon played this year was against UConn, where he just kept running into Donovan Clignan, and that was an issue. But I've spoken about him at pick 19 for the Raptors, so I definitely get the idea of bringing in a guy that has a lot of basketball on his resume that can sort of step in and play a role immediately. Andrew, if you were to like trade up, like you were saying, I like Bub Carrington long term, but I think that Jared McCain could be the pick. Like if you were to be able to get to 18, 17, bring in a movement shooter to this team that has absolute trees everywhere else. Start getting like really creative with the screening. Start leaning into a guy that can potentially operate off ball in lineups where maybe Cat has a little bit more of the creation burden. He could be really, really fun. And then Dylan Jones is my other guy, the funkiest player in the draft. 6'6", had a like 20 rebound, 10 assist game or something along those. It was mental, wasn't it? But he's one of those where I haven't necessarily seen it work in the NBA, and that either means he's going to bust or he's going to be worth way more than where he's picked.
The Wolves pick has the luxury of I don't think whoever they draft is going to be expected to play this year. I do think they're going to go out. I mean, I'm doing a mid-level exemption series for zone coverage. And like, I think they're going to get one of the not as good as Drew Holiday brothers or a Spencer Dinwiddie or some Terry Rozier if he gets bought out. I think they're going to go out and try and get a guard to play behind Mike. And then I think their best bet is like a Jared McCain, someone who's, if he has to play, he can at least make shots. But the hope would be 2 years from now when Mike Conley retires, he's able to step into that role. They really don't need anything else, though. I mean, with Nas, with Nikhil, from what I understand, it sounds like Kyle wants to be here and the Wolves want him here. So it is going to be, I just hope they trade up and get a better prospect than what 27 could give them.
It's fair. What about, just another name to throw out there. What about Tyler Kolek? I know he's shorter. He's like 6'1", but he's a good playmaker. And I know it's another player that a lot of people have some opinions on. And I know, he's one of those guys that might not do anything elite, but he's a very solid player. And he played really good at Marquette for a long time.
If I was the Wolves, I would be looking for one of those 19-year-olds. Because by the time they're going to play, they're going to be 21 or 22. Kolek's a senior, if I remember right. So that means he'd be closer to 24, 25. And I'd just be looking for a younger guy. That being said, I mean, I liked watching him play at Marquette. So,
Jack,
the very few college I watch, Marquette is usually one of the games. So,
I think this idea of like 4 years of just a floor general makes a ton of sense. 4 years on rookie team control as well for a team that's as high up against the salary cap sheet as Minnesota is absolutely makes a ton of sense. I would almost be inclined to see if you can pick up like another couple of second round picks or like a second round pick in the 40s or the 50s. Maybe you take a gamble on a guy like Antonio Reeves. AJ Mitchell is a guy that I like. And, if you want to maybe look at Tristan Newton out of UConn and you say, yes, maybe this isn't like the highest upside guy in the world, but if we have a stretch where like Mike Conley's out and some guys get pushed up the rotation a little bit, they're sort of ready to play. I almost think that 27 is a little bit of a dead zone at the guard spot where I almost want to go, can I go higher, like Andrew said, or can I go lower and have multiple bites at the apple?
No, I would agree. I think that is a fair assessment. All right, to end it, Jack, give me your one prospect that we haven't talked about that you really like and everyone should look out for.
So I'm going to do this in 30 seconds because we kind of skipped over Dylan Jones a little bit. He is absolutely my guy. 6'6", I think 236 pounds, plus wingspan, 2 steals a game for the last couple of seasons out in Weber State, and a really, really advanced pick and roll playmaker for a guy that has absolutely no burst. He's able to get wherever he wants. He knows how to leverage his strength and his size. And I think that he's going to be a really, really fun bet. He shot upwards of 80% for his past 3 seasons at Weber State as well. So while the jumper hasn't necessarily been there from 3, I think there's an indication that it may well come a little bit later in his career. So Dylan Jones is my guy. And there's a lot of good stuff out there on the internet if you want to read more.
I love it. My guy, Judah Mintz, from Syracuse. I love him. I think he's big. He can play a really good defense, and he's a great at getting to the free throw line. So I'll be even quicker than 30 seconds. Look out for Judah Mintz. I don't know where he's going to go, but I really, really like Judah Mintz.
Cam Christie, spot up 3-point shooter. Go Gophers.
Let's go Gophers. We can end it there. All right, guys. Thank you, everyone, for watching this really long podcast. We didn't get to every player I would have liked to, but that's okay. We got some good in-depth analysis of a lot of good players. Excited for Wednesday to see what happens. And again, thank you, Jack, for coming on the podcast. Feel free to shout out your stuff. Plug everything if you want.
Anytime. Guys, I had an absolute blast coming on. I love chatting to you guys, and I'm sure that maybe in the dead zone in summer, you guys can come back on and we can maybe do a little Western Conference preview in relation to the Timberwolves. I think that could be really fun. If you're going to check out anything, check out my Zach LaVine video that is probably coming out tomorrow. Hopefully, Awesome. It's my first video essay. I'm going to be plugging the hell out of that thing. So go and give it, 90 seconds of your time and see if you want to stick around for the rest of it.
Well, thank you so much for coming on again. And yeah, have a good rest of your day, guys.
Appreciate it, Emmett.